Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my monthly reading wrap up for January 2023. Somehow we are already a month into the year, even though to me it feels more like only a few days has passed. January was a good reading month, but before I get to talk about the books, I'd just like to make a comment on something, and that is I had planned from January this month onwards that I would be doing a little bit more regular videos at the end, because for quite a few videos at the end of last year, for at least 3 or 4 months, I kept doing multiple skip weeks where I didn't do a video, which I don't like doing. I feel bad or almost guilty that I don't do videos. I know nobody's going to comment on it, but it feels bad to me on a personal level because I've been doing this booktube now, and for the record, I've now been doing booktube officially for 9 years now, as of the last day of January, so that. So doing skip weeks feels bad and I don't like it. However, January had something that I had to do which was rather draining on me, so frankly I couldn't get videos done, sadly. But that thing has ended and I should now actually be able to have time and energy to do videos again. So hopefully, I can't guarantee it though, but you never know, but hopefully I will actually have weekly videos again rather than every few weeks, which I don't like at all. Anyway, now I will talk about the books and indeed the point of this video. And the first book that I read in the month, by the way, there's 4 books by 4 authors in 2 genres. And the first of those 4 books is How to Stop Time by Matt Haig. This is not the first book that I read by Matt Haig. It is, however, my favourite book so far by him. The other books I read by him were good. This is better on a personal level. Now this is a story, it's science fiction as such, set in obviously the real world. Essentially it's the idea of having certain people with essentially sort of genetic abnormalities that essentially cause them to not be immortal but to age much slower than anybody else, roughly 14 to 15 times longer than anybody else. So rather than living to somewhere between 80 to 100 years, they're living to maybe 1,000 years, 1,200 in some cases. So obviously through the ages, some of the very long-lived ones, who are now relatively older by comparison, they've been around since frankly hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and they have seen how the world works and seen how anybody that's got sort of anything strange about them gets basically abused and mistreated. Obviously, years ago, of course, there was the idea of being a witch and being evil and that sort of thing. And indeed, the main character of the novel, a character called Tom Hazard. Hazard isn't entirely his real name. To be honest, he's already several hundred years old, so frankly, names are something you can just sort of get rid of. His mother was actually killed for apparently being a witch, although she was actually normal. It was actually he's the one who's actually got this genetic issue and he's now super long life. And essentially it is a sort of love story, essentially a little bit of a history of him. But the love story comes in because he starts off, he has to move every now and again because otherwise it would look suspicious, of course, having the same person in the same job for like 100 years, never seeming to age. Yeah, that can't happen. Looks too suspicious. So they have to keep moving about and reinventing themselves and renaming themselves. All the people that he knows that are like this. They're a relatively small number, of course. And basically he moves to England and starts teaching history, which obviously he's got a rather interesting knowledge of because he's seen a lot of history, being hundreds of years old already. And he has a rather romantic interest in a teacher, French teacher. And that's where the romance storyline comes in. I'm not going to say more than that. It's just an interesting story. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the plot actually much more than that, to be honest. But you learn about his history, how the people in his situation have been affected by their aging. You think, oh yes, not aging and living what seems like forever would be great. Actually, it's quite hard for him and the others because, of course, everybody that they like and love ages. I mean, if you have a child, you will outlive your children, grandchildren, and multiple generations of your family if that happens by a large margin, because you just won't age, well, at least in the same way. So you will see everybody that you love die without fail, unless you end up having an accident or something. And this is particularly hard, so this is an interesting concept, one that I've considered before in other books, and obviously, you know, super long life or immortal beings is one that comes up in other books over the years, but I think it's done really well in this one. And Matt Haig gives it a real personal feel and a real emotional pull to the book, which frankly he's really good at doing at this point. I mean, I've always thought he's very good at making his books very emotional and very personable, and he doesn't skimp on that here. This is lives up to his high quality standards of making the book truly personal, emotional, and you actually like the characters. Well, some characters, obviously some characters are frankly unpleasant, let's say, and you don't really want them to do well, but mostly you get involved and invested in the book, and frankly I would recommend this if it sounds like your thing, because it really is worth your time. It's only worth mine. I'm glad I read it. The second book that I read in January was Utopias of the Third Kind by Vandana Singh. This is a short story collection, also with an essay in it. It's a very short little book. I actually bought this in Chicago during the Worldcon when I was there only 4 months ago now. Seems closer actually, but it is only 4 months. And this was a really interesting collection. I loved the short stories in it. The essay in it I also liked. This is part of a series by is this PM Press, is it? Yes, by PM Press, Outspoken Authors Series. That's actually where it says it. I forgot that until now. And this is actually the second one of these that I have, unless I'm mistaken. The first one that I read, I can't even remember which author it is now, honestly. And I probably didn't look it up for this reason. Obviously didn't stick out to me as much as Vandana Singh's did. Vandana Singh and this particular entry in the Outspoken Authors will stick out to me. I will remember this book for a while, I suspect. I mean, next time, whenever that happens to be, that I read one of these books in the Outspoken Authors, I will definitely remember this one, and the other one that I can't currently remember, I will continue to not remember, I suspect, because this spoke to me on a more personal level. It's got some really interesting short stories. Obviously the shorts, I'm not going to talk about what they involve, but science fiction, fantasy with an essay, talk about real world events and the way the world is and where the world could be. And it's just a really interesting little collection of very thoughtful and extremely well written short stories, which I would heavily recommend because it really is quite something to read. The third and penultimate book that I read in January happened to be a buddy read, which I read with Kelsey, known as the Fancy Hat Lady Reads on BookTube. I will link her channel in the description box below. She's great, by the way. And the book that we read together and talked about was The Spare Man by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is now the 5th book maybe I've read by Kowal, could be the 4th. And it's not my favourite by Kowal, I'm not going to deny it. I mean, the Lady Astronaut books are phenomenal. They're still my favourite by Kowal. I think most of the people that I know that have read this say the same thing. The Lady Astronaut books are stand out for now for Mary Robinette Kowal. This was certainly good. It's a murder mystery with a science fiction setting on a space station. A newly married couple and their small dog are on their honeymoon. The wife of this couple, she is a very rich individual, heir to a massive fortune due to long distance communications and such. So the amount of money she got is truly ridiculous, frankly, beyond anything anybody else got really. And they're on the honeymoon, and the murder gets committed, and basically her husband, or that she's only just married, gets accused of murder. Obviously she knows that he didn't do it because, you know, they've been together, but, you know, so things start spiralling outwards. This is a sort of a cute and cosy sort of murder mystery of sorts. Obviously with a science fiction setting, so it sort of mixes things up a little bit. The characters are well written, the setting is good. I do think though, and I talked about this to Kelsey, that the conclusion at the end of the book was too brief. Obviously at the end of murder mysteries you tend to have a kind of, you know, the traditional Hercule Poirot, you know, the accusing parlour type idea where everybody's, you know, in one room and gets that. That does sort of happen in a way. Obviously no one will always do that idea. And there is a resolution to the crime. But the resolution to the characters and to their emotional states and their personal lives isn't resolved to the same degree. I mean, you get involved not just in the murder but in their lives. And the life part is fairly glossed over towards the end, which was a shame, and I think was a missed opportunity to do something alternative. I mean, obviously I'm not an author so I can't say, but certainly something there that could have been added and improved, and it just, the ending just a little bit flatter than it should have been personally. But it was a well written book, and I did and I'm happy that I really read this with Kelsey. We had a fun time talking about this, and I'm glad I read it. And this is one that no, I have actually heard in Chicago at the same walk-on that I mentioned earlier. I actually heard Mary Robinette Kowal read out, obviously with her doing the accents and such, a chapter from this book as well, which was, you know, it's an interesting experience. I've actually heard the author herself read a chapter from the book I've just read. Now on to the final book that I read in January, and that is Vagabonds, written by Hao Jingfang and translated by Ken Liu from the original Chinese. Now this is a science fiction book. It's a hefty book, and indeed the longest book of the month that I read, and one that I was really glad that I read. The idea of it is, and the Vagabonds comes into play, is there's a group of young students. They went there when they were in the early sort of teens, and they are now 18. Went to Earth from Mars, the Mars colony, spent some years on Earth, and now they are returning back to Mars. And it's about their experiences and how they've got a different perspective than most on Mars, because of course there's they've lived on Earth. They know about the fact that, you know, Earth's massively more populated. This is obviously future Earth where the population is even higher than it is now. I think they might have mentioned briefly some kind of reference to a number, but it's way higher than it is now. I think it's like probably 15 billion or something, which is like nearly double what it is now. And obviously the issues that we've got with population, and of course the opposite of what Mars has. Mars is a colony, it's very focused, and it's very different and unique, and it alters their perspective because they see from the large perspective of lots of people, and they also see from a small perspective and a relatively small point of view, which gives them a unique perspective and really affects them, especially when it affects other things on Mars. When Mars is going through a bit of a transitional phase, let's say, with the way it works, you have to be very conservative and reserved with what materials you have. I mean, you haven't got limited physical resources. You have to conserve things and build things in a particular way to, you know, maintain your supplies. This affects things and affects how society is developed. The group of vagabonds, you know, these returning Martians from Earth, they see this and they start getting sort of realising that they're not happy with the way Mars is, because the Martian society is very you know, sort of fixed and plodding along, because it kind of has difficulty changing, and they want it to be a little bit more fluid and open like Earth society is in their eyes. But of course the Martian government and, you know, or representatives, they don't see this they want things to stay the same because that's how things work. It's all about the idea of practicality versus idealism, and what works versus what you want to work, but doesn't always work due to practical concerns. So it's the conflict of idealism versus being a realist and practical. Sometimes finding and this is the point of the book, it's trying to find a middle ground between those two concepts without actually burning down the world that you live in at the same time. It's well written, thoughtful, and one thing I want to say about this is very similar to The Spare Man in that sense, in that the ending felt a little bit, something about the ending, it didn't quite work as well. It felt like it accelerated the ending a bit quicker than the rest of the book, mildly, but it was still a solid ending, and I'm perfectly happy with it, so no complaints there. And overall, I would heavily recommend this. If you want something that's thoughtful and obviously talks about those subjects of being practical, but also idealism, and throwing on that middle ground, it's an interesting book on that subject, and one that I personally would recommend, and it's well worth reading. And with that said, that is it for all of the books that I have read during January. So if you have read any of these, or you would like to, then please leave a comment and we can have a talk about them. Or if you want to know more information on them, then again leave a comment and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. The links to these 4 books on Goodreads I will put in the description box below, of course, as always, and as well as the link to Kelsey's channel. Kelsey is great, by the way. I would recommend you go check her channel. She's a really nice person who does really thoughtful and in-depth reviews, and yes, somebody that I'm happy to class as a friend. And with that said, that is it for this wrap up. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next one. Bye for now.